Hi, I'm Jo Sparrow, President of Jigsaw Queensland and host of Adopt Perspective podcast. Today's conversation sits at the intersection of personal story and systemic failures, and what can happen when someone decides to do something about it. My guest is Katherine Dawson, the creator of Origin Archives, a growing collection of resources, stories, and media documenting the history of and lived experience of donor conception in Australia. And the idea has also grown now to include a podcast by the same name. But this work didn't come out of nowhere. It's grounded in Katherine's own experience as a donor-conceived person, an experience that began with curiosity and over time revealed something far more complex and confronting. Katherine, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Jo. Yeah, happy to be here.
I'm really pleased to have you with us. And I thought we might sort of start back at the beginning with your personal story, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you first understood that you were donor conceived, how was that explained to you and how did you make sense of it at the time?
Yeah, so I guess my mum always wanted to be a mum and found that she had struggled having her own children and then went through the process of IVF and fertility treatment and things and then found that they needed to use a donor. So my mum was accessing this fertility treatment when they had, I guess, tightened all of these adoption laws as well, so that was not a path that she wanted to go down. And she just went straight for trying to have her own children. And then found that her partner was infertile and she wasn't able to access fertility treatment as a solo mum at that stage. That was not legal. So I assumed that she sort of stayed in that marriage for the sake of having a child. It wasn't super happy one. And I guess just before I get into sort of my story, because all this like donor conception stuff seems to be quite pre-planned. There's a lot of like intent in our creation, I suppose. And I think the first people to be sort of like the canaries in the coal mine were adoptees, foreseeing my own story and foreseeing and even saying in media the kind of struggles that I'm kind of up against. And I really just wanted to thank those people for speaking up and saying something initially whenever they had the opportunity, because all of the things that have happened in my creation and even like just all the steps along the way of everything I've found out, I sort of have seen people foresee and say, hang on, you need to do something about this before it happens. And it has happened in my case and many other donor conceived people's cases. And I just really wanted to thank the adoptee community for trying to raise the alarm before, a huge multi-million-dollar industry stepped in and started making people in the way that they made me. So I just kind of wanted to firstly express my thanks on that as well. And I guess like when I was conceived was around this time that this sort of change was happening where, women had to be married to even access the treatment, but then it wasn't really even acknowledged that it was important who the donor was. So my mum didn't necessarily get to sort of choose. They sort of matched my biological father's traits to my legal father so that I would sort of pass as his and so that a lie could be maintained, I suppose. And then my mother was told to never tell me, go home, forget about this sort of thing. But she, from the start, wouldn't do that. And she'd sort of decided that she would tell me at some point and then always told me I was IVF conceived. So I had this scientific image from the beginning of sort of my mum holding a mixing bowl. This is not very scientific already, but mum
cooking class. Yeah,
it was more the homemaker sort of side of Eastern European side of my mum coming out, but sort of how she would whip eggs in a mixing bowl under the arm and whipping. I kind of had this image, at least outside of the body. Like I knew that I wasn't this sort of like, egg and sperm inside the body. I was outside of the body. So that's sort of where the sciencey sort of part came to be in my mind. And being frozen for potentially 7 years as an embryo was sort of known. And so, we joke and say like, well, that's why my feet are always cold. Like there's jokes that, you were frozen and stuff that start to happen. I think dark humor is definitely a coping mechanism amongst the donor conceived community. Because if you don't laugh, you'll cry maybe. But we would make jokes about that. And it sort of felt like a strange, wasn't like, images of like Superman thawing. There's like this weird futuristic, almost alien type thing that I always felt because it was this other process. And I only had knowledge of one other actually only IVF conceived person at my school where I grew up, and whether or not they were donor conceived, I don't know. They might not have been told. I don't know. That's pretty common, but I know there were more donor conceived people at my school or in my town and in the Riverland where I grew up that didn't know and potentially still don't know that they're donor conceived. So I was quite lucky to be told by my mum, and I think she always treated me as a little person, not necessarily just a baby that she wanted. She always wanted to be a mum and did always want a baby, but she was always very honest and open and upfront with me, and that really felt quite respectful and helped us to bond really deeply, I think. Yeah.
And thank you, like the beginning, acknowledging that link between donor conceived people and adopted people, because I can tell you have no greater ally in this space than adopted people, because you're right, we did see what was happening. And I always think the fertility space is one where I think it's like a stress ball, like one of those gooey stress balls. And adoption used to be where it all squished out. And then as we slowly said, hang on, no, we can't just keep taking children from their mothers and, using these social experiments to put them somewhere else. You poke that back in and it pops out in donor conception. And now that's getting more regulated slowly and getting popped back in. And we see surrogacy doing the same thing.
Yes.
And the first people to speak out about it are people who are impacted by adoption, and now donor conceived people for surrogates as well. So because we've lived that experience. So, and there's a lot of common themes, if not exactly the same experience, a lot of common themes. Yeah.
Yeah. I find it really interesting. I mean, I've known since I was 11 that I was donor conceived. And I guess being 35 now, I'm seeing the needle shift of like, well, tell your kids because it's important for them to know where they come from. But then it's sort of still not deemed important to know who they come from and know that person as a person and have them in their lives. And that really tricky balance of social family versus biological family. And it goes into that real ownership of the child. And it can feel very icky very fast and very complicated very fast. And I guess it's sort of, I feel like I have a bit of a different viewpoint now that by the time you release this, it might have been 17 years that I've been without my mother. Like she passed away when I was 18. So
sorry.
Well, thank you. I'm quite far down the road, I feel like, from the last time I spoke with or saw my mum. So the changes that happen in a donor conceived person's psyche over nearly 20 years, I feel like is a long felt departure from potentially what I was taught to believe or told to believe. And I've been able to spend almost 20 years forming my own opinion and finding out my own information. And that's really, being an adult now too, seeing a mum did this and then, I don't know, just accepting a stranger's genetic material and the trust of the clinics. Like it's I mean, it was, 30 plus years ago, but it's just very interesting to be this far down the road.
Yeah. It really changes over time, doesn't it? Certainly when I think about how I thought about adoption as a child opposed to my 20s and to now, it's vastly different,
Yes.
And people say, oh, I know someone who's adopted and they're fine with it. Like, A, you don't know the conversations they have with organisations like ours, and B, that conversation you might have had a long time ago could be
Yes.
quite different to now, and they probably wouldn't
Yeah.
share with you anyway what they truly feel. So
Exactly. Feeling safe to share certain things with certain people is very far away from your actual feelings on things, I feel. And the other thing is that I think your feelings definitely change over time, and with how much information you find out about the clinics or what they did or didn't do, and the informed consent. And what really is informed consent if you have no idea who that other biological contributor is, and how far and wide clinics are selling those other vials to other families. I don't think you can have informed consent unless you know the full extent of every piece of information. And lots of people aren't willing to psychologically go there. So I don't think that they're fine. I think that a lot of people just can't touch it. And whether that's to do with loyalty to the parents they grew up with, which is a massive, massive thing.
Huge.
Yeah. And that's, I don't even have to explain that to adoptees in the slightest. But being 17 years down the road after that loyalty being impressed upon me. And I, you can still hold multiple things in the same space at the same time of what was right or ethical or not or ludicrous, all those sort of complexities and nuances. I feel like our communities are so well versed in. It's like, the first language we were able to understand. And then we learn English, or whatever other language first, Yeah, this emotional intelligence learning has been massive and continues to be because, there's lots of things that I can't say because this isn't just my story. It's at least 53 other people's stories who are in the exact same boat as me, whether or not they want to dip into it psychologically or not. So it's, you're instantly part of a big group of other people. Yeah.
So on that, were you curious about the man who was your donor growing up? And did you feel any kind of pull to meet him?
I think I grasped from early on that adults were like super complicated and kind of like, why do they do these things that deviate so far away from the morals of Disney movies? I think like I kind of didn't want to touch any of that. And I was just being a kid and I had other interests like art or music or my friends. The peer social importance of that was then I just didn't need to know anything about any of this. So when there are donor conceived people that just show no interest in this as a teen or an early adult, I'm not surprised in the slightest. Because those things don't matter, perhaps. Even brain development wise, I think my prefrontal cortex came in quite late. So I was more interested, in my late 20s. And I didn't see a photo of my biological father until I was 27. So I wasn't so interested in him because I had my social mother and stepfather. My dad acted like my dad, even though I knew there didn't need to be a biological connection to form a bond. And I had my friends that were like my little bestie was like my sister and we were so close. And the where did I come from? It was probably always in there. I wanted to know that because I was so interested in my mum's heritage and she didn't know a lot. Like her family had come out from Latvia and had to kind of cover up a lot of stuff. And I was always so curious about her side. So it was no wonder that I was going to develop a curiosity about both sides because I feel like it's human nature to ask. And if it's so normalized and so fine now, then I feel like openness and truth-telling should be fine too. And so I more was curious about siblings and I instantly pictured, because I knew that our mums could be different people, I just pictured like the earth and all these little kids holding hands and we're all different colors and we're like children of the world. And that kind of was true. So we have siblings that have mothers from different countries and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of I understood that concept of it quite easily and quite early. But I was fine to just go on the monkey bars the next day with my friend, and she thought my legal father I didn't gel with. I had sort of an issue figuring out who he was. I knew that it didn't quite fit. And so when that relationship was a bit strained, I said to Mum, it'd just be easier if he wasn't my father. And she said, well, that's correct. And so that was really nice to not have too much of, till I was 11, I kind of sensed that he wasn't my father and it didn't make sense, but I never said anything. But if I had been met with like, oh, what are you talking about? Or that kind of gaslighting sort of thing, that would have been quite difficult. And I think another thing that I think potentially a lot of adoptees can relate to is that feeling of not quite fitting and not knowing why, or maybe knowing why, and it being something that impacts your like sense of self and your trusting your own feelings. And then there's so many like little gems that I have actually gotten out of your podcast as well, Jo, with especially like the addiction specialist.
Paul Sunderland, yeah.
That was incredible. Like incredible of just these little things you've never thought about in this certain way. And it just, the enlightenments I feel like don't stop coming. So even if I learnt as a kid that I'm donor conceived, I feel like knowing that you're donor conceived is really the bare minimum of what you can learn about yourself and how you feel about this and how your feelings keep changing. Yeah.
It's interesting when you were saying that little globe with the kids holding hands with different mothers from internationally, because it made me think of, could that have been a marketing thing that got into you? And one of the things that we share in common again, is that there's a lot of miracle-making marketing and perceived altruism around assisted reproduction technology and specifically donor conception. What did you believe about your donor when you were growing up?
I think there's definitely a lot of marketing around a nice, healthy, altruistic, smart man is the only kind of donor. When I learnt my biological father's birthday, one of the non-identifying bits of information was dated on his 21st birthday. So I don't know what else you buy other than beer on your 21st, but I'm guessing that payment went towards that. So, it's a bit of a jokey thing as well, but it's a paid for thing, and that you're part of a transaction. It's really horrible. On one hand, you're wanted so badly. You're this miracle. You're fought for. You're, all of these, you were so wanted. Yeah, long fought for. We wanted you so badly. But then the other half of you is given up, sold maybe. And you can't ignore that. If one thing's true, it just sort of highlights the other. So that's what I find as a 35-year-old person now, that's what I find so interesting, is that there's this donor shortage, apparent donor shortage. For one, it's because there are limits on how many people they can create from one person's gametes, which is important. And that's what we wanted, because we don't like having too many siblings to meaningfully know in our lifetime, possibly bumping into them, dating them, marrying them, and having kids with them as well. But also knowing that we were part of a transaction is really, it's such an internal battle that you kind of have to fight with for your entire life, going, I was half given up. And then now with their marketing to donors, if a man is nice, healthy, smart, and altruistic, why would he be giving up the same contribution that he would to his own children if he really sat down and thought about it? Like, that would be something enormous to grapple with. So I'm really not surprised if people are giving these things lots of thought, that maybe they don't want to just give up a child. Like, if some people are fighting so hard to have one, why would the same be true for people just giving them up on the same, at the same rate? I can't understand why people would think that would be happening at the same rate. Yeah.
I have a 25-year-old son and a 17-year-old son. And, I think of the ages that they were able to, have young men donate their gametes. I think, how can you possibly understand the ramifications of what you're doing in the future at that age?
Exactly.
There's just no way my sons would be capable of really understanding, and they're smart kids. There's just no way they could understand what they were doing and make a decision that then would have to be lived with for the rest of their life at that age. And that always seems a little predatory. Is not the right word. I just can't think of the right word.
I think it might be the right word.
It might be predatory. It feels a bit like it, It's not fair. It's certainly not something I think you can get real consent at that age.
No. Yeah. And see, that's the informed consent. Like, do you consent to the clinics sending it internationally? Do you consent to them making hundreds of different donor conceived people in different jurisdictions, because that's the legal loophole that you can do that now? So it's wild to me now, thinking that it was better when I was made, because at least clinics hadn't worked out international shipping at that stage, because I could have siblings across the world and I would not like that at all. There are enough made across Australia, and Australia's, legislation and the 10 family limits, it's 10 families, not even 10 siblings. And that's only state-based. So you could still have 100 siblings within Australia. That wouldn't be hard to reach. And there are donors who go to different clinics and go to different states, or, even things that I've found out about my own donor could still absolutely happen today. And so I just...
Did you discover, because I know you discovered some really interesting stuff about your donor. What was it?
So even I was kind of like this sort of kid that was curious and was willing to be part of finding out more information. And so when I moved to Melbourne, I was actually part of talks at Monash IVF, which is hilarious now. And I'm sure they would not show footage of me talking, saying, Mum told me, and that was all fine. And simultaneously at the times of these Saturday mornings that I would do talks at Monash, to be an example of the product you could get, this well-adjusted donor conceived person who seemed all right. And I'm just lucky.
I'm having such a strong reaction to that.
Yes. So not only could the product go back into the clinic and be an advertisement, I would stand up and say all these things. And my mum had been passed away maybe for like 3 years. So I was deep in simultaneously being a spokesperson for, hey, you could end up with me. And being told by Monash that, no, you can't have your mother's file. You need to present her death certificate, which I said, well, I'm the informant. I know she's legally not it's called a natural person in legal terms anymore. So you don't have to protect her privacy legally anymore. I can have those files. And if I didn't know that, then they probably wouldn't have given it to me because I could fight them on a very slight legal basis that, was horrible to say to them because it reinforced that that's my reality, that she'd passed. And so they did eventually give me that file. They said, this is how many siblings you've got from that one donor code, and you're not allowed to know who he is. They said no medical information on the top of the sheet. They got these non-identifying bits of information, one in 1983 and one in 9. And they initially gave me those. And then I said, what's this scribble here, when it said psychiatric treatment? And there was an S, a C, and something or other. They scribbled over it. Underneath, they did write that a younger sister had Down syndrome, but that was actually not even factual for who in the family had that. So that was like a lie. But I think no one checked over that SC something or other scribble next to psychiatric treatment. And he had schizophrenia at the time. His dad had told him, you should stop donating. And he was doing it for the money and trying to, gather money and savings to do flying lessons, which I found quite admirable. I was a child of a divorce. It's very common in donor-conceived families that there is a divorce when the child's like 2-3 years old. It's super common. I think maybe the infertility trauma and the lack of counselling and all that stuff, like the parents having to keep a secret like that and the tension and strain that would put on their relationship, it makes sense that they might separate around then. And that's what happened with my family. So I was a frequent flyer. An unaccompanied minor flying Qantas, going from Mildura to Melbourne every 6 months. I had a little card and I loved flight attendants and them looking after me and giving me colouring in books and, the little Qantas meals and stuff you'd get, and I loved it. I loved flying. So when I found out he was trying to get money for a pilot's license, I did love that. And I felt really sad that I obviously didn't get the good eyesight that he must have had. And so there were little things like that I thought were really cool, but you never expect a serious mental health condition to be on the other side of the information. The worst case scenario that I think they prepare you for is that the donor might have passed away and that you'll never get to meet them. But in my experience, it's sort of like he's alive, but I'll never, ever be able to access what he really thinks or feels about any of this because his illness sort of prevents that connection.
Yeah.
And he's a massively vulnerable party in this. How could he have informed consent around all of this? Like, if he were to try to apply to the Central Register now to have, even if he could acknowledge his condition, if he tried to apply to the Central Register in Victoria to warn all of his offspring about his mental health condition, it's potential that they might deem him not mentally able enough to make his own decisions in that regard. So how can he make such a huge decision to donate and them not checking or not legally having to, even today, not legally having to check medical information with any other party, just take what a donor says in good faith is mind-blowing.
It is absolutely mind-blowing. It's a lot of other words too, but yeah.
Yes. So I think when people sort of are wondering if I'm angry at him, I just can't be, because can he even understand what is fully going on and think about it in terms of that? And as well, he was 21 and possibly a bit younger. Like we said, like deciding what the ramifications are of those enormous decisions when you are so young, you are kind of being taken advantage of. It's just coincidental that that's when the clinics like you to donate, because that's when your genetic offspring can, have
peak
the
sperm
best
age,
right?
really.
Yeah. But I mean, there are no long-term health outcomes for people conceived via IVF or donor conception. The clinics don't want to find out that, a plethora of medical health conditions that we all seem to have, or the long-term outcomes of women having IVF. There certainly are stories. If you Google egg donor death, what did she die from? My own mother got cancer. Like, there are in the solo mums groups, I know there is a protocol for if a mum passes away to create a book for that child filled with all of the photos and experiences they've all had together. And I think, why do they have that protocol? Why do they have a system set up to support that child? Why has that happened so many times? And I just, there's so many things that you find out about in the donor-conceived community, not only with donor-conceived people or donors or parents, how they were treated with counselling, how they're treated physically, emotionally, and in the long term, having zero support. It just makes me not want to ever set foot in a clinic ever. Even for like genetic counselling, why would I go to a clinic who created these issues? Why would I go to them for support? I don't think I could ever. And, I sit there and I probably educate the practitioner on donor conception issues in that hour and pay them $220. And then they say to me, wow, that's a lot. And like, what can they do?
Yeah. Yeah, I was talking to someone on the ABC last year, and we were discussing, access to rights and access to information and support services during like the period of time where we lost a lot of access to information in the adoption community in Queensland. It kind of meant then that your only real person that you could talk to at that stage was the Department of Adoption and Permanent Care Services. And I was saying, you don't go to the person who chopped your arm off to help get it sewed back on.
Exactly.
You have to understand how we feel about these
Yes.
institutions and organisations.
Yes.
And that they are not a place we want to walk into for support. It has to be someone completely separated from it, without any interest in any other part of that industry. They cannot be part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then I see it a lot too with the advocacy for certain things now, like surrogacy or, regulations around donor conception. It's sort of like you need to look at who is asking for what they're asking for, and do they have a financial interest in what they're asking for? Because they really often do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it's an industry and a business. And I've spoken to doctors who are going into that industry or business with, financial means in mind, and they don't really want to pop the hood and have a look underneath and see what's sort of lurking underneath beyond, the surface of what it is they're doing,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So you discovered other things as well, that your donor might have had multiple identities and conceived a very large number of children. Is that correct?
Yes. So that is not something I expected. I remember going to the VADA meetings, which were held at the Vanish building in Melbourne, and I didn't really realise at the time how lucky and really fortunate I was stepping into a room full of donor conceived people that we could talk about our stories. And we had a wine around the corner first, so my friend and I were always pretty merry. It didn't take much, a couple of sips, and I was like ready to talk about anything. And it was just really fun because these people really understood. And I remember someone getting their list and there were 25 siblings on it. And we were like, wow, 25 siblings? What? That's so many. How can there be that many? And clinics don't follow the NHMRC guidelines of 10 family limits unless they're law. So they're very good at saying they do things and not doing them. Like at those meetings, I remember hearing that clinics don't send gametes interstate. And then we had a donor conceived conference. And I met a girl there. She had a really similar donor code to me. I'm 22R and she was 28R. And she said she was from South Australia, and I just instantly wrote it off because she's not my code. She's from a different state. That's not possible. And she thought we looked similar. And I was a student. I didn't really have the funds to buy a DNA test at that time. It was definitely something on my list, but I was just focusing on getting through uni, affording rent, apparently going to Monash to talk about being donor conceived and all of the information I had on a Saturday morning sometimes, which was zero information. And then I got my DNA test results in 2016. And so I finally prioritized that. And there were laws starting to change and information becoming more possible to access because of all of those Victorian donor conceived people that fought for those laws to change. We had retrospective removal of donor anonymity in 2017. So 2016, I got my test results, and that sister that I had met in real life in 2015, she was my match. Yeah, we're standing right near each other and I felt nothing. And that was really strange that we both totally know we were donor conceived. we're at a donor conceived conference and not have some kind of instant bond. That's really scary, because how many siblings meet out in the wild and both don't even know they're donor conceived. So they estimate there's like 60 to 90,000 of us in Australia. There's, what is it, 1 in 18 are born via IVF. Like, who knows how many mix-ups there are and all of that stuff. Who knows? But there's a lot of donor conceived people out there, and we just don't know who our siblings are. I know barely, maybe 10% of the total siblings I've got. She was from
How many
the
have
first.
you established?
Yeah,
so
with her code, we tried to find out the sibling lists for her code, because that had to have come from Victoria. So I had 14 on my list, I think, at that stage already, plus her, and then she was told there were another 4. Okay, so that's, getting close to 20. Then we had another sibling pop up on Ancestry who had no idea they were donor conceived. They had a totally different donor code again. So when I got in touch with VADA and said this person has come forward, they looked at their list. They had some siblings who were already on the voluntary register willing to meet siblings. So they DNA tested them with me and they were a match. So that was another 3. Plus that list had 33 siblings to 22 families. So just because of a few people on Ancestry popping up, that has now reached up to 56, I think, is the most, the latest count. Any siblings that have popped up on Ancestry on the DNA sites have been from other lists, never from my original list with my donor code. I have not found any siblings from that original list. And so we keep finding siblings who do not know they're donor conceived. Even the siblings that I find that we have found, their birth dates range from 1984 to 2003. Even we think the one born in 2003 didn't know, had no idea. So when I find a match pop up on Ancestry, if they've built out their family tree on both sides, that's usually a big indicator to me that they have no idea they're donor conceived, because they've built out their paternal part of the tree. And so they're going to see all these lists, these matches with our profile pictures on there and wonder what's going on, or just think they've got lots of cousins. Yeah, it still only says close match. But yeah, unfortunately, sometimes we get chatting and then they find, hey, you've done media. Hey, what's this all about? So I don't lead with that information first. It's really hard now because I'm sort of like the keeper of all of this information. And I've had, over 10 years to digest it. And so my siblings now, any that pop up, might only be learning that they're donor conceived, but might also be learning a lot, like 10 years worth of information in a day, which I don't think is helpful. I think that they're going to need counselling along the way. And again, I was very lucky to have been told in the first place, but then to be supported by the same counsellor who was informed at VADA, had experience in all of this, knew the legislation, knew the history of the legislation, was in touch with organisations like Vanish, had experience in adoption, was completely outside of the clinics. Yeah, I was just very, very lucky that it all, I was supported in the way I was supported, and knew donor conceived people, knew people like Lauren Burns, who's definitely done a lot for donor conception and the legislation in Australia, and being part of media and humanising.
Yes. Read her book
yes
quite a while ago. Yes.
Yeah, and she, we were chatting at that stage and she sort of mentions my case at that point, because one of the names that my biological father did use was someone that had passed away. I'm pretty sure it's the list of 33 siblings to 22 families is a name of someone that he knew that had passed away. So those people on that list, if I hadn't have connected with that list, they might have gone to the register and been told, oh no, your biological father had passed away, when that was completely incorrect. On the other side of a DNA test, we would have connected. So if our information is based off of our records and not DNA, I am a big advocate, unfortunately, for DNA testing. Even with giving your private information away, for me, that has already extended my life. So going back to your original question, when I matched with that sibling and other siblings, we've been able to share medical information. And that has led us to, because a lot of us now are in our 30s, there's a precancerous condition that's shared amongst siblings, that without that family history, I couldn't go to my GP and fight for a check because there's no family history of it. But in knowing my siblings, here it is, go get a check. And I've been able to check for that 3 times. And apparently, you know, my surgeon had said to me the second time I'd checked that this wouldn't be good news by 40. It's a condition that if you don't check in your entire lifetime, you then potentially have the rate of up to 40% chance of developing bowel cancer in your lifetime. So that's pretty significant.
Yeah.
Even though bowel cancer is on the rise for younger and younger people, having that family history information means you can check, and you can get that check if you want it. There are siblings that know about this information and they choose not to, and that's their decision, that's their medical decisions. But just knowing that it exists in the sibling group, you can do what you want to with that information. I just think the freedom of information and that informed consent that you get to have over your own autonomy of your health, your own choices is, really, really important. And if, you know, Monash IVF and Melbourne IVF, who have created the siblings that I've got so far, and Repromed in South Australia, and Monash in Queensland, that I don't know the amount of siblings in Queensland yet at all. Monash won't give me that list because my mum didn't have her treatment there. All of those siblings should have that information, but Monash sent a letter in 2018 to the addresses they had on file that were 30 years old.
Right.
And they deemed that as reasonable steps to take to warn them of this precancerous condition. So if by chance you lived in the same house that you were conceived in when you're 30, maybe the letter got to you. I just think their effort level is really atrocious. I know I would have failed anything that was judged on those grounds. If, you know, if they had tried to reach my mum, they would have sent a letter to a house in Frankston, and she passed away. So that letter was never going to reach me. So I had to give over my personal information to something like Ancestry DNA so that I could live longer.
Yeah. That is just so horrendous, Katherine. And something that's really sitting with me is the level of responsibility you're carrying on your shoulders that shouldn't have to be your responsibility. And that's, I'm really sorry that you're carrying all of that.
Yeah, thank you. It is really heavy, but I think too that the parents that I had and the family that I had and the morals and stuff that I grew up on prevent me from just going and living my life or whatever. Like, what do you really stand for? Oh, I'm fine. That doesn't sit well with me. And I don't think that that's what my mum would do. My mum would put her foot in it for saying things maybe that she shouldn't say. And so I'm still my mother's daughter, and I'm going to, you know, try my hardest and be probably quite a big irritant to Monash IVF, which I find quite funny now because, you know, would I still be a poster child for them on a Saturday morning if I had the full information? You know,
you do that. You be the pea at the bottom of that stack of mattresses. You do it.
Yes, that's me. Yeah. Yeah. I just
How
think...
have the clinics and systems responded when you've raised these concerns? Because I know you have.
Yeah, they ghost me. They completely ghost me. I can't tag Melbourne IVF on Instagram anymore. I think they sort of hope that you get tired and go away. But because I know the medical information, I've got more of a chance of living longer. And I just think if someone had medical information for my mum that could have helped her live longer and someone stopped her from having that information, that is just disgusting behavior. For these people that, you know, women are taking out their super to freeze eggs, and that's possibly what a clinic could be doing to you in 20, 30 years, is like keeping medical information from your child that they helped you have, that you know, just the treatment and the continued care or duty of care is just non-existent. It's really non-existent. They're being parents are being sold a dream, but have no idea that this is not rare. Even in my case, there's 53 other families or 53 other siblings I've got. So that's the same amount. And, you know, and I know, like, I have siblings that developed schizophrenia as children. Like, that did happen. It was, you know, I have this kind of like survivor's guilt that like I was for some reason okay. And the death of my mother somehow didn't crack me. You know, I was somehow a rule follower that I didn't get into any substances. You know, like I have my sister-in-law to thank. You know, she did psychology studies and worked for an organization where she's like, don't you touch that stuff, any of that stuff, you know. And I studied music. Like, music is, you know, the jazz and the, you know, all of that sort of stuff. You could very easily get into that and never return mentally. And I am just so lucky that I've avoided all of that stuff so far and now have the medical information from my siblings. I'm just so lucky, not because I was made by donor conception or IVF or got, given to a family that wanted a child. Big deal. I'm lucky that I have the most informed consent that I could possibly have at this stage by pushing for information, and off of the backs of donor conceived people that fought for this legislation who didn't survive past 30 because they were denied that information. I think I have to come out now because, I'm in touch with recipient parents who are going through things like embryo mix-ups, or were given a donor they didn't consent to create their children, or were, on the voluntary register because they thought that this is the important thing to do for their child, connect to the donor early, connect to siblings early. And then they found that that donor actually has schizophrenia, donor to mine, but, found out that donor has schizophrenia. And then Monash, again, also used the very same letter that they gave to me saying they don't know the inheritance pattern of schizophrenia, therefore they will not be letting any of the families know that information. And that group of siblings, I think, were born between 2017 and 2024. The only thing Monash did was contact that families and tell them they can't have any of those remaining embryos because the donors rescinded their consent to use them. And it's just the covering up. Like, be honest. Just be honest and tell these families about that. If it's known medical information that does have if it's known to be genetic in the slightest, I feel like the duty of care should be on the clinics to tell the families, and they just don't. And those parents are not coming out publicly to protect those children, and those kids are so young, and we don't know how that's going to impact them in their lifetime. And so I just feel like I'm just in this little sweet spot to be able to talk, and I clearly talk a lot. Sorry, Jo, I said I would talk your ear off.
Keep talking. Here in Queensland, we've got the donor conception register that's going to be opening up towards the end of the year, I believe.
Yes.
Waiting for a bit of an update. But, so then all these people who are donor conceived are going to be getting contacted to let them know that they are donor conceived. Meanwhile, here in Queensland, as a support organisation, I can tell you we are contacted regularly by adopted people who have only just found out they're adopted. So we call them late discovery adoptees. And what you were saying about the mental illness really resonates with me because, I have very close biological links that have bipolar disorder, serious mental health, institutionalization, suicide attempts.
Yes.
And I have 2 sons and, for me, luckily it hasn't come into my life, but I have spoken to them about drugs and stuff. So we have really serious sleeping, mental health, genetic stuff in it went through multiple generations in my family. You cannot muck about with drugs and alcohol because that is sleeping in your system, and we just cannot muck about with that stuff.
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
It's just so important.
And the thing is too, if, Monash IVF want to say that this is all environmental and any outcomes of my siblings developing schizophrenia is all environmental, what, a 10-year-old developing that? I don't think so. I would say that sounds more genetic. But then what environment are they creating where those people have autonomy to choose not to take drugs or to choose to live their life in a way that they can mitigate stress? Or if there's an implosion waiting for them, if they find out they're donor conceived, what kind of support is a clinic offering if they're just letting that person go off and find that out completely unsupported? That's, again, really disgusting behavior to me. And that's why I really, really wanted now VADA is completely disbanded, which is really sad. Yeah, it was such a great service when I was going through it. And then it went through a series of changes that were pretty devastating to donor conceived people in Victoria, and then eventually disbanded. And I think that the period where there's been no counselling, that was about 12 months, was really detrimental to donor conceived people in Victoria. But also that didn't make me feel safe then for any siblings that did pop up, like, where are they going to go to? Who are they going to, they need to have counselling, at least the 3 sessions that they're owed from, the register, at least 3. When you find out your parents are not your parents, your donors used a bunch of fake names, and that you have this potential for a precancerous condition or to develop a serious mental health condition, you're going to need way.
How important was that peer support for you? Just being able to sit in a room with other people who just get it.
Yeah. And even then, like, they say to me, oh my God, you've got a horrendous situation. I've probably got like one of the more complicated ones that I've heard of. I definitely know of ones that are very difficult and serious alongside this, but this is a doozy of information to find out, an absolute doozy. And now they're going to find a sister who's done media and says it all in the media because I'm trying to get the laws changed. I'm trying to use Narelle's law to warn them about a precancerous condition, and it doesn't work. So Section 68 in the legislation in Victoria says that a donor-conceived person can be warned about a medical condition and can be communicated that information. It's sort of, fighting against the privacy, or we have to protect their privacy. Well, if it's an information that's going to impact their health and well-being, they should be owed that information. But then 68E says nothing in this part requires a clinic to communicate that information. So it's just a section in the legislation that completely undoes their obligation to communicate the information. So,
when I watched the inquiry that happened here in Queensland, the only people who weren't coming out and advocating for those kinds of changes, and the only ones who were advocating against it, was the Queensland Fertility Group. It was like against a tide of people. And I'm like, wow. And he even seemed to be like having a embarrassed chuckle when he was giving his evidence, like at the thought that he is the only person swimming against this tide. And I thought, wow. Yeah.
I think the amount that they want to, or clinicians or a doctor that has taken part in donor conception, think how hard they fight is a sort of indicator of how hard they're trying to keep secrets locked away. I would feel pretty bad too if I had manipulated my friends or my students into donating and making such a huge thing, huge decision just so I could make a bit of money that had lasting impacts on their whole life and their kids' lives. These people that had become donors under the guise of anonymity, yes, let's protect their privacy for eternity, their social children, biological children in their own family, possibly having hundreds of siblings that they could then go on to marry and have kids with. And so the doctors keeping that all silent is self-serving. The self-serving nature of it is just, again, horrendous behavior. Like, I can't fathom it.
You're saying, as you said, you've shared your story publicly. Preparing for this, I watched your Four Corners episode and the episode on Secrets We Keep by podcast, by any means, was the donor conception strand of that series. It was really confronting for me to listen to your episode, as they included a snippet from one of the founders of the Queensland Fertility Group, who is now retired OBGYN, Dr. Doug Keeping. And he was the doctor who delivered my first son in the year 2000. Just for the record, I didn't use any kind of IVF. My adoption experience killed that for me, but I used him anyway as a OBGYN. And he said something in the interview that was shocking to me. He said that donor conceived people essentially should shut up, be glad they're here and get over it. And it just took my breath away from someone who has profited so much from this industry, to be so arrogant and empathetic, and not having thought about it from the perspective of the children conceived through these means. Is this common kind of sentiments among ART doctors and clinics?
Absolutely. It's very on brand. They sort of, they're saying something very outright and they're really voicing their opinions, probably because we're getting louder and there's more of us. They're really not shy. They're not shy about voicing what they really think of us. They end up with Order of Australia awards, and the doctor that made a lot of siblings also fought for a lot of siblings of mine also fought for solo mums to be able to access the treatment. So I think it's really, really difficult when there are these big what are deemed improvements to accessibility, essentially, but then there are no safeguards. Just because we can, we will. And anything like having manipulated students or trying to recruit donors or using your own genetic material, all of those kind of things that the doctors, I'm sure they acknowledge are unethical. I think that they realize that and they need to keep things under wraps, especially a clinic like QFG. They're actively being sued by multiple parents for mix-ups and all sorts of things. They don't have to publicly tell anyone about those mix-ups because they're not a publicly listed company like Monash is. So I think if a company is privately profiting, getting millions, they're going to want to hold some things quite close to their chest and discredit or discount someone like me as much as they can.
Yeah.
I really did appreciate that the Secrets We Keep podcast did give me that last little say, because being able to speak after someone saying that and being able to have my say was really, really great. And I have to love that it made you angry at him, or it evokes
I was fuming.
Yes.
I was quite sick, actually.
I love that, because then I'm not alone in that feeling. And if more people, I have friends now who are not donor conceived or have no connection to this, they just see stuff that I put out on the internet and it's humanizing it, and it's making people think more and making people feel more. And so, like, feeling understood, there is nothing that feels like feeling understood. There's nothing like it. And that's like, if I can get more of that, that's, I don't know how I need to contribute or something. And it doesn't matter that this takes up a big chunk of my life, because the feeling of being understood, I needed to be understood. And in this big world of complex things, cost of living and all of these like life things, and I'm trying to do something creative and, just regular living, there's this whole other thing on top of that lots of people can't fathom, So if they can kind of understand bits of this and I can feel understood and we can share these feelings, there's nothing else like that to me. And I'm really appreciative, and I love hearing that. Like, I'm sorry that you felt angry and felt that emotion, but I just really appreciate that you could understand that it's just these doctors and clinics that say these things about us, they really mean it. I hear about these conferences within the industry in Australia that they feel particularly targeted by the negative press. And, where are all the good, happy stories? And sure, where are they? But does someone fully exist who's really, really happy with being donor conceived if they know the full truth of the extent of how many siblings they've got, who the biological parent is, all the relationships inside there? Did everyone get past shame and secrecy? There's so many elements to all of this. Who is going to be happy on the other end of that and not have something to say about how they were created if they can psychologically go there?
So there's been such a shift in your story from this is my experience to this is something so much bigger and I want to do something about it, which I love. I absolutely love. And you've spoken about, how that sort of shift happened for you, and I love that. And it brings us to Origin Archives. So can you just tell us what Origin Archives is and why you felt that it needed to exist?
Yeah, I felt like I was sort of banging on social media about the same things. And I was like, here's this book, here's this documentary, here's this person like Narelle Gretsch. You should know about her. You should know about the history. You should know about Lauren Burns. You should know about VADA and how there was this support group, and in 2015 there was this RUDC conference, and there are these people who've been trying. There's so much history, and people think that there's not a donor conceived or there's not these people floating around who care about this or who have done media, or it's got like a big history. And I just feel like once a story breaks, it flows through the news and is gone. And there's been such support I've felt and encouragement to find my own answers of where I come from and who I am because of those people who also did the same. And I just want more awareness on the stuff they've already done, because it's such an emotional, when Four Corners came out, I was being so public about something that I really shouldn't have to be public about, and I shouldn't have to warn my siblings, and I shouldn't have to fight for that bit of information to make it to them. But you're backed into this corner, you're forced into doing this. And I just want people to know that I didn't start doing it out of nowhere. The first donor conceived person I met in Melbourne was Lauren Burns, and she was so welcoming and so generous with her time and her emotional, just her person. She was so giving. And then now she's more quiet in that respect because she did so much, and she deserves to go have a life actually too. And I think the other part of it is personally that if a sibling comes across me, I want them to be able to get the information they need to without having to come to me directly, because that might be too hard or too much to make it through to wade through all of the difficult things and parental relationships. And I'm my own person, but I can't help but be a big indicator of, hey, this thing happened to you, and I'm never going to be a fresh person to my siblings. It's always going to be, I'm underneath all of the layers of complexity from their own life, and then whatever they think of our biological father, whatever they think of our sibling group and how widespread it is and all of that stuff. So they might not want to get to know me, and that's, actively happening, and that's fine. And I am, just trying to get that information. I just feel like there should be nothing stopping someone from having the information. I feel like that's the bare minimum of what we're all deserving of. And our relationships would take time. So it could take someone like a decade of watching stuff that I do for them to then feel like, oh yeah, I would like to be that person's friend or that sister, or get to know them, because we're not the people that we are on social media. There's way more to us than just that. So I didn't want anything to be gate kept. I just think that it's such a rich history, and it is pretty like grassroots, but it's still been really rich, and there's still been a lot of emotional toil and personal effort, and that should all be documented. I think as well, coming from the other side of my family history, I come from Latvian heritage, and the Latvians are very, very intentional with their traditions and keeping language alive, song, dance, recipes. It's very, symbolism, stories of things are handed down with symbolism and recorded. And even though, through their history of, at one point in Latvia, the Latvian language wasn't allowed to be spoken and things. So holding on to your story and your heritage and having that documented is really, really important. And I'm still trying to find those parts of my family tree as well. So I think that I've got that on the other side, and just find that archival thing is very, very important.
Yeah. And it's essentially like a website resource that you can go and quickly find all different, anything in Australia that's happened about donor conception. You can find links to the podcasts, the television shows, the resources, which is just great to have a one spot.
Yeah. Yes. Sorry, I should have said that part too. That's
all right.
Kind of like a library. Yeah, library. And things that are happening, like with the Queensland legislation changes, and there's like an email address for the pre-registering of that register there, an email address and a form they've got to fill out. If you want to stay updated with things that are happening in Queensland, all these kind of things, like, DNA test information you might want to consider, research that donor conceived people have done, any like sort of research studies, anything that I'm finding, I'll try and pop on there, because there's like a plethora, there's too much to, once you start digesting it. Some people read a book and then not touch anything for a while, or listen to a podcast and need to digest it and need to put it down and go do other things in their lives. And I just think that if they want to entertain that, there should be a spot for it all. And then sharing stories, the part that I love too is that we had, I don't think it's still going anymore, but in the VADA organization, they had a donor conceived person, I think, helped start this, where you would have like a legacy video. So you could watch your biological parent talk, and you get a lot out of that potentially. If that's the only thing you get is a photo, you sort of cherish that and see yourself in it and get more understanding about your identity. But if there was, I've started to do interviews with people, if one of Lyndall's siblings see her and they go, oh my God, like, yes, I look like her, or I say things like she does.
And this is on your podcast, which is now known as, also known as Origin Archives.
Yeah. And so I really wanted to interview people as almost like a timestamp of, this is what we feel like at this point in time. This is how many siblings I've got. I could talk to Lyndall again in 10 years or something and see how things have changed, or has her opinion changed. Just, there's so much like a rich history, but also maybe like a richness in someone's experience of being donor conceived that would weave and change with their life and their life stage. And how they look and how they act or what they think. I just
You're
find that
creating a
really,
monument,
yeah,
much the same as Adopt Perspective podcast was. Like, we didn't know how long it would go for, but it's creating a monument of stories to something that's in a disenfranchised grief, just like your experience is, where
yes,
society doesn't hold that up as, what have you lost? You're lucky you got born, shut up.
yes, yes,
But you're creating the experience, the
yes,
monument that doesn't exist. There's no tombstone for what we
yeah.
all experienced.
Yeah. I think if
Yeah,
something
which is
sticks in
fabulous.
your gut, something doesn't feel right, I think document it, because even in the past 10 years, I've seen parents' perspectives change, the general society, the beliefs around donor conception change. Like, when I was made, it was like, of course, anonymity is a thing. No, it's not anymore. And the countries that still have anonymity are seen as completely outdated. And anonymity can't even be promised anymore because of DNA testing. So I can't imagine like what, we're going to
Yes,
have.
that cat is out of the bag.
Yes, it's out of the bag. And even with being honest about being donor conceived, like we're going to see in 20, 30 years, if, everyone's worried, are the children all right? Are the children all right? The children are going to make do, and they're going to be, for now, as all right as they're allowed to be. But in 50 years, like, will people still be talking like me, saying all sorts of things about donor conception? Probably, because that's their experience. And I think documenting it is really important. And
It's a really good point, Catherine, because sometimes I get a little scared, like when my generation stops talking about the experience of adoption, does it start creeping back in? We've already had that kind of ideological thinking raise its head here in Queensland,
can't
and
believe
still
that
might. Yeah, so we might be fighting that right now. I hope not. I hope we've mended some fences and got some information across to them that we might start pointing in a different direction. But what about the next time that review comes up and somebody wants to bring back adoption? But at least if we have these voices there, then it's something that the future people can look to and research and bring back out. At least it still exists, that monument, that
Yeah.
resource. So I
Yeah.
think it's fantastic what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's
Yeah.
really common for no one to care in their 20s. I think that's fine. If my mother was still alive, I don't know how much I would have cared. But there's a point where you start to kind of maybe want to look into it and start to question things. And that information then of people feeling like something isn't right about this, or this is how I feel, but I haven't necessarily been allowed to feel that way, and I can't discuss this with my parents. Those people in that community and things that they've said possibly 30, 40 years before you were allowed to feel them, they've already voiced that. And so that's accessible for you, and you maybe instantly won't feel so alone.
Yeah, absolutely. So where can people find Origin Archives and listen to the podcast?
Yeah, so if you just look up Origin Archives in Spotify, or it's evielucas.com/Origin Archives, there's like sort of sections. So books and podcasts is in one, research is in one. There's a help section. Help. I've just found out I'm doing like help. There's like go-tos at the beginning because it's a lot. You might have just found out from like a family argument and you don't, you Google donor conceived, points to Donor Conceived Australia, pointers to different groups on social media or accounts to follow or people to listen to. Like anything I find, it's all there. So and also like feel free to reach out to me if you want to as well. I'm always happy to help point you in a direction that might be helpful.
That's fantastic. And I've got to say, follow Origin Archives on Instagram because unlike me, Catherine is really awesome at the social media stuff and has some fantastic reels that she puts out. I've been liking them and sharing them. I love them. They're just fantastic. And they make me feel very, very bad at social media, but I'm a bit older than you. So.
No, you just have a little go. And if like they say, if things bomb, no one's seen them anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Yeah.
I'm sure if I bombed, it would go viral or something.
Then
because
it's
they'd be like, oh, look at this idiot.
That's good. That's good press then. Yeah. It's funny because like I try and make things, I want to have the sort of kind of indicator of like, is there more to your story? Is there, because that's kind of where a lot of donor conceived people who have no idea they're donor conceived, they have a bit of the story maybe, like, mum tried really hard to have a baby, or my parents were really old, like much older when they had me, or they tried really hard and they let me know that, but there might be more to that. And so just sort of, I like the gentleness, hopefully, just thinking, putting a little seed of, is there something more to this? Because then maybe there's not a huge shock. Like maybe there's
Fantastic.
a bit of hope that there's always hope that it's not going to be a big onslaught of information for someone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Katherine, thank you so much. Like I said before, what really stands out in your story is that it's not just what you've uncovered, but what you've chosen to do with it. And that's what I love, turning something deeply personal into something that supports others and contributes to broader change. Origin Archives feels like it's going to be an incredible resource and record of experiences that for a long time weren't acknowledged or visible. So thank you so much for sharing your story. I really value that. And I know what it takes out of everyone to come onto this podcast and to speak about their story. And I just want to really thank you and, take care over the next couple of days.
Yeah.
And thank you for all your work.
Thank you, Jo, and thank you for doing your podcast, because I've personally got a lot out of it, like the light bulb moments and things that are ongoing. Like, I just really appreciate it. And the allyship, I just love it. So I'm happy to be here, and I think I'll be okay because I feel really supported. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And to everyone tuning in, not turning in, you might want to turn in. We've been talking for a really long time. Every story is different, and even though there's, many common themes, every story also really matters. So if you're looking for support resources or simply a space to be heard, please know that Jigsaw Queensland is here for you. And if you're a donor conceived person, check into Origin Archives and have a look too. It's such an incredible resource. And if you'd like to support the podcast, just leave a review, share the podcast, or get in touch, because we really love hearing from you. And I know our guests love to read your comments as well that you've left about their episodes. It means a lot to them. And if you've got your own story that you'd like to share, head to our Adopt Perspective page on the Jigsaw Queensland website. Just scroll down a little bit and you'll find our prospective guest form there. So thank you for listening. I'm Jo Sparrow, President of Jigsaw Queensland. Take care and bye for now.